Hi, welcome to what I hope will be the first of a number of videos over the next few months that will provide you with a bit of an insight into the background of what goes on with certain people connected with Kirkistown. I hope to be talking with certain team personnel. I hope to be talking with certain manufacturers and other individuals of interest at Kirkistown. So my first person that I've decided to get in touch with and interview is David Cousins. Now, many of you may not know David, some of you will, but David would be the father of the new MX5 Racing class that was introduced last year, that being 2019. The class got off to a reasonably good start, some good racing, and suffered a little bit, as you would expect in the first year of racing, from a lack of numbers. I think the biggest field was 7, but bear in mind that I've seen series go along for 2 years before they got anywhere close to double figures and then take off. I'm thinking about the Metros back in the 90s and more recently the Fiesta series. So hopefully the MX5s will grow exponentially. Across the water, they are a phenomenal series. In fact, there's a number of different series, all of which are getting great grades, and hopefully we'll be able to replicate that over the next few years. So I'd like to introduce you to David Cousins.
Hi, Donald.
Hi, David. Good to see you. Tell us a wee bit about yourself personally.
I'm 57 this year, 58 this year, sorry, going on 22. I have 5 of a family, married to lovely Samantha, and we have Ruth, Aaron, Calvin, Ben, and the last one, not least, is Ellen. I come from Belfast originally, but have lived in Ballywalter for the last 40 years. So still not from Ballywalter, as far as Ballywalter people are concerned, but that's where I've been for the last 40 years, more or less, yes.
So you're like myself in Nuts Corner. You're still a blow-in after 40 years. I'm only there 25 years, but I know exactly what you mean. So then, cars, how did you get into cars? Was it something you always wanted to do from you were in school kid, or what happened? Was it an accident, or tell us more?
Always had an interest in cars from the day and hour that I can ever remember. As a child, I remember in my father's home bakery business, we lived in a big flat above the home bakery business, and I used to hang over the settee upstairs, looking out the window, car spotting. That's an abiding memory that I can give you there. I always have been interested in cars, things mechanical, lawnmowers, airplanes, you name it, lorries, buses, everything mechanical. My father never had that interest really. He was a baker, a home bakery business he had on the Rosetta Road in Belfast. I served my time as a mechanic with 2 garages, if I can remember properly. The first one was Gale Motors in Bangor, Ford dealership at the time, and then latterly after that I went to Knockdean garages with David Bryan, Mark and Simon's father, who I really enjoyed working for. It was a great time, I had a good time there, but there was a bit of a recession came along and things went downhill a wee bit, and I ended up actually working for 10 years in my father's home bakery business after having served my time as a mechanic. And then between one thing and another, I ended up I opened up my own workshop in Cumber under the guise of Cumber Tire Service, not the present Cumber Tire Services, but my own at the time was Comber Tire Service, and finding it very difficult. At the time I was divorced with 2 young children, and the children were living with me, and things weren't great. But we just kept going just the same. I moved back down from Comber. Actually, I moved back down to Ballywalter, and eventually got a house round Ballyhalbert direction. That had a big yard, and there was an old barn in it, which I then converted into a workshop and started working there. So anyway, I sort of outgrew that workshop and the house, really, and moved premises to the Bog Road here, next to Kirkistown Racecourse, and very convenient it is too.
Okay, well that brings us up to date in the sense of how you arrived basically opposite Kirkistown. But I know you have a history of racing, in fact competing in motorsport, which predates the MX5 series quite a bit. I think you've done some hill climbs, possibly sprints, and you were involved in the Sunday series as well, not right?
Well, I've always been into cars and racing, and it was more the racing and that side of things that interested me more than a lot of my contemporaries of the time were rally men. I had bought my first Droop Snoot Firenza years and years and years ago, and rather than use it for hill climbs or sprints or anything else, I decided to build a car, and it wouldn't matter then if I binned it or put it into a gate post or whatever. It wouldn't really matter, as I didn't want to do that to the good road car. So my first ever event actually was the Croft Hill Climb, just outside Hollywood there, run by the Thoroughbred Sports Car Club at the time, and did alright, did okay as far as I can remember. It didn't hit the car, which was a plus. I then did the Craigantlet Hill Climb, I think on the same year. This is about 1996, maybe 95, 96, I can't actually remember. A lot of water under the bridge since then, and I then decided that I wanted to really go racing, so I entered a race at Kirkistown, the 500 Club, and it was my very first race. I didn't know anybody at all. I just turned up with my license and my entry fee and everything else, and went out onto the circuit. Had never driven, rightly or wrongly, had never driven Kirkistown before. Did alright in the practices, was going very well, was happy enough with the car at the time. But when it came to the start, and nobody had actually explained to me, and I hadn't asked, but there was a handicap system of starting, and I jumped start. I did a jump start, and the chap, shortly after the lights went, I realised what I had done, and slowed down to allow the guy who was beside me on the grid to also catch up with me. So I let him catch up and pass. And he was in if I remember rightly, it was a Fisher Fury, a little orange Fisher Fury car, a very fast little car. And as I said to you, all throughout practicing had been going very well. Hadn't been selecting fifth gear on the back straight at all, but whilst coming up the back straight I selected fifth gear, and hadn't realised that I had forgotten where my braking marker was for the Firenza, and rather than go over the top of the Fisher Fury, I went off to the left and rather ignominiously into the earth banking backwards, and I think that was either the very first lap or the second lap, but it didn't get very far. Took the car home, thoroughly disgusted, left it in the corner, and didn't look at it for another 6 months. Then I think the following year I did the Craigantlet Hill Climb again, and did okay against a lot better machinery and one thing and another. And then I sort of went into a period of not doing any motorsport at all for a couple of years because I had just started the business in Cumber. And yeah, started the business in Cumber, and then Billy Finnegan, Super Sunday Series fame, had started the Super Sunday Series, and I got to hear about it. The entry fees were very, very, very attractive, to say the least. So I entered a race. The first race I went to was at Nuts Corner, and at the time, Billy and the Super Sunday Series, they were running hot rod rules, so they were starting the fast men at the back of the grid, and they had to make their way through the slower cars and whatnot throughout the race. If you were new to the scene, they put you on the front of the grid initially, just to see how you would go on one thing or another. So they put me on the front of the grid in the Firenza, and I think I won both my heats and the final. So I wasn't on the front of the grid ever again. I was always toward the back of the grid, along with Christian Cochran, Ormond Christie, Gavin Smith, Simon Bell, Ralph Jess also be another one, and various others. So, but those Super Sunday Series years were great racing. It was great racing. A lot of people frowned upon it because it was a wee bit outlaw, if you know what I mean. But the saloon cars, the super saloon car class that I was in, was a very, very good class, and there were a lot of fast cars in it, and we had great fun, and it was a great time, and I always look back on it with great fondness. In fact, I still have lots of photographs of that. So.
And I think we should have a look at some of those photographs. So here you are in the Firenza at the Sunday Series. Looks like coming out of the corner at Nuts Corner. And that looks to me like Ormond Christie right on your tail. That was pressure, having a multiple world champion, hot rod champion on your tail at Nuts Corner. That car looks even fast that you're driving, just standing in the photograph. And lo and behold, that's you with the spoils. Excellent. So, coming up to date, why MX5s? How did you become so associated with MX5s? Because you were associated with MX5s before you ever started racing them.
Why MX5s? MX5s because whenever I had moved to Ballyhalbert and had my own workshop in Ballyhalbert, there was a fella who lived down that direction, a chap called Richard Patterson, and Richard was bringing cars in from Japan at the time. Whenever there was lots of money floating about the country. This is going back before the big crash, financial crash that is, and he would be bringing me MX5s on a weekly basis. They were coming in, he was importing them from Japan, and David, will you service this? Will you put a time belt on it? Will you put a water pump on it? Will you fix this? Will you fix that? Fix the other? And of course, whenever I then was testing the cars after I had done the repairs or whatever, I soon got to realise that actually, you know what, these little cars are absolutely fantastic driving cars. They're just superb, beautifully balanced, very responsive, very hard to make a mistake in them, really. They're just a super car, and they're very well built as well. The build quality in them, the steel in them, everything was good. And I got a fondness for them. This is going back maybe 15, 16 years now. And then what happened, the cars that he was selling to different clients from all over the country, really, they started to bring the cars back to me if they had any further problems or repairs or anything else. and the clientele really just built up from that. And then about probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided really that I needed to concentrate fully on MX5. So 95 to 98% of everything I do now is MX5 related. Whether it be engine work, gearbox work, differential work, suspension work, and welding. Of course, you can't own an MX5 and not have it welded, because they all need it at one point or the other. So yeah, that's why MX5s, because the work was there for me to do and I was happy to do it, and they're a great car to work on as well.
So I would say them, you would do a lot of work for people who will never go racing. So what do you actually do for MX5 customers who are never going to race their car?
What do I do for non-race customers? Well, non-race customers actually make up the vast majority of my clientele. So it's anything really. It's just mechanical, bodywork, chassis work, suspension work, anything at all. Obviously, if anybody knows out there, anybody knows MX5s, they'll know that they have a tendency to rust. And there are particular areas where they do rust rather dramatically, particularly the later ones. The Mark II, 2.5 cars are, I would say, probably the worst of the whole lot. So we do a lot of fabrication, welding, remaking sills, remaking inner sills, outer sills, wheel arches, you name it, chassis legs, everything. So that's all done. Service work, timing belts, clutches, you name it, just anything and everything connected with MX5s, we do them. Hoods, we reline hoods. We've had cars completely refinished, from taken apart, rebuilt, all new stuff in them, repainted, and back to the customer again. So that's what we do for our non-race customers. There's nothing we don't do, really.
And so then it comes to racing MX5s, or MX5s that race, and you have a number of clients who do that. So tell me about how you facilitate them.
As far as our motorsport customers are concerned, we have a lot of customers who do the Targa rallies and the auto testing, and then we have the race car customers as well. Auto testing and the Targa cars is really keeping them going and repairing all the damage that they do consistently. Particularly the rally cars seem to get a terrible battering, but the MX5 as a vehicle seems to hold up quite well. Our race customers, I have several race cars. We built 4 cars last year, all told, to put on the grid for last year for the start of the season. And what do I do for them? Well, their cars sit here actually, and they're happy. They don't have to buy a trailer. They don't do anything, because we're so close to Kirkistown. It just means I can bring the cars across to Kirkistown on my trailer, or sometimes sneak them across, drive them across.
We didn't hear that.
And we'll present them to scrutiny on the Friday night, make sure the car is all prepped and ready to go for them to turn up on Saturday morning. And they turn up on Saturday morning, put their overalls on, their helmet on, and they go out racing. And then we bring them after the day's racing. We look after the car from start to finish, really. So there's nothing that we don't do. It's full preparation. We built the cars ourselves. We put the roll cages in, so there's nothing that we don't do. Engine, clutch work, you name it. My own car actually has suffered the most actually last year, for whatever reason. I didn't actually do anything to my car before I started racing it, and I hadn't been the one who had been servicing or looking after that particular car. I just this car just landed in my lap, and I converted it into a race car, but I did have trouble with it during the season, but it was all sort of fairly rudimentary basic stuff, but we got it ironed out eventually.
So did you say you had built 4 individual cars for last season, the 2019 season?
So last year we put 4 cars on the grid. One for Rob Kennedy, the white Mark 1, and the green Mark 1 for his dad, Jim Kennedy. And then we put another car on the grid for Oren O'Neill, who ended up winning the championship in her Mark 2. And Rob actually in his Mark 1 holds the lap record at the minute at 1 minute 10.2 seconds. Both those Mark 1s, both the Kennedy Mark 1s have the later Mark 2.5 SVT engines in them. That coupled with the Mark 1 body shell, which is a bit lighter than the Mark 2 2.5, makes them very nippy, very fast little cars. But Oren was consistent throughout the championship last year with her entries and whatnot. So and wins and second places and everything else, very consistent and a very hard driver to beat. So yeah, she got the championship.
We'll have to say that unfortunately, because it was the first year of the MX5's racing at Kirkistown, it wasn't an official championship. But I know what you're saying. If you were to take the points as awarded for a championship, Oren would have won it, I think, by 2 points or something like that. So, just in case the powers that be get a little bit annoyed, we didn't actually have a championship as such, but had we had a championship, Oren would have won it.
My car suffered, my own car, which was the 4th one that we put out, suffered a little bit. I put the wrong gearbox in, basically. I put a scrap gearbox in the very first meeting, just sheer fluke. But we managed to sneak across at lunchtime, at the lunchtime break, and pull the car across, change the gearbox and bring it back for the second race, which I think, if my memory serves me correct, I actually won the second race of the day, so I was happy enough with that.
This is you leading Robert Kennedy in your MX5. So what gave you the idea to go for an MX5 series? Was it because you had seen the successes in England and the prolific numbers they get, or was it just the fact that you thought these little cars are so good they should have their own series here?
Well, as far as setting up the series was concerned, it really we had been track daying a couple of cars for maybe 3 or 4 years prior to last year, 2019, and this was coming up sort of summertime 2018. I was itching myself. I was itching to get back into the racing car, one thing or another, and it seemed to me that it was a shame that so many MX5s were used for auto testing and lanes rally cars and everything else and show cars and whatnot, but yet there was nothing actually for them to race in. So they are an ideal race car. They have double wishbone suspension all round, discs all round, and a great, well balanced, predictable car. And I took it upon myself. I thought, well, if nobody else is going to do this, I have to do this. Somebody has to do it. So I sat down. I made a few phone calls. First of all to Donald O'Neill. And he thought, yeah, very good idea, Dave, but you're on do it yourself.
That's right.
And I basically just sat down and wrote out the regulations as far as I could tell, and as far as I could really think of trying to cover every single base that might call into question or come into question, and covering all my bases, as it were. I wanted to make the series affordable, not cheap. Cheap is the wrong word. I wanted to make it affordable, which I think it is affordable. I don't think really once you have your car built, it doesn't cost really any more to maintain or race than, for example, a Fiesta. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with the Fiestas and the Fiesta Racing, because you know, they're like ourselves, like the MX5. They're an entry-level motorsport, but the MX5 just is a little bit faster and slightly more exciting, I think, than the Fiesta. And as I said to you, I was just itching to get back into motorsport myself. My ambitions for the series, would be for next year. We started out last year, 2019, we had 6 cars on the grid. This year, 2020, we should have had 7, 8 cars on the grid. That might happen yet, but as everybody knows, this virus thing has switched everything off, so we just have to wait and see. But we have 7 cars sitting, waiting to go, with another one in production just at the minute. Though that car might not see it out this year, it might have to wait till 2021. My ambitions for it would be, I would like to see at least 12, 15 cars on the grid. There's no reason why that can't happen. There are plenty of little cars out there and plenty of good drivers out there. And it's just such a shame whenever you see how popular the MX5 series is in England, and it's a phenomenal series over there. Our series is slightly different. The rules are slightly different, but I wanted to keep the rules as far as costs were concerned. I wanted to keep the costs down to an absolute minimum, but yet allow a certain amount of modification to the cars. That's hence the name, the Modi 5 Cup. So it's modified MX5s. So whenever you look at the spec Miata field in America, it's absolutely huge. I was watching a race there the other night on YouTube, and there were over 60 cars on the grid at Road America, which is phenomenal. So I would be dreaming if I thought it was going to get that, but if we could make it sort of, you know, at least 12 cars, 12 to 16 cars at any time at Kirkistown, I think that would be fabulous, and it would be great racing. We now running we were to, this season, we were to start with a reverse grid. So the results of the race, the first race, would determine the grid positions for the following race, with the drivers doing a complete reversal. So first would be last on the grid for the second race, and so on, which would make it again slightly more exciting for the drivers and slightly more exciting for the spectators as well, I think. So yeah, that's my ambitions, is to see it grow. These cars are very capable. Anybody who's half reasonable at all with a set of spanners and a screwdriver can maintain an MX5. It doesn't have to have a mechanic or anybody else working at it. You can do it yourself. They're not difficult cars to work at. They're easy, and I'm happy for anybody to ask me questions out. Any information you want, I'll do my best to help you out. So yeah, that's my ambitions for this class.
Fair enough. Now, one of the things that always fascinates me about people who are involved in racing, everyone knows them as racing people. But over the years, I've been really surprised by what some well-known people within the racing fraternity did outside of racing. Come to mind the late Jim Todd, who was a wonderful person, and I was absolutely astounded to discover that Jim was a badminton champion. I mean, a really, really, really good badminton champion. And I was also amazed to discover he was a lot older than he looked, which I assumed was the badminton that helped that as well. And there are other people who have interests that are really diverse and not connected with motorsport. So do you have anything like that?
Other interests? Other interests would be cars, and then maybe some cars and motorbikes. And no, seriously, I used to water ski a lot. Back in my 30s and 40s, I used to water ski a lot, maybe twice, 3 times a week sometimes. That all sort of fell to the wayside as the cars and stuff really took over. But water skiing is one of my interests. Planes, old aircraft, particularly piston-engined aircraft, from the sort of the 1930s through to the end of the 1960s. But I always had a fascination, as going back to the very first question about cars and things mechanical, the fascination with the piston engine, the reciprocating internal combustion engine, it has always fascinated me, always interested me. And some of the innovations that came from the aircraft industry, as they generally do, through to cars and the racing industry, I can see a join there. I have a lot of my idols. I don't really have any idols as such, but I have people that I would look up to, and would be role models. Not suggesting for 1 minute that I could ever reach the dizzy heights of these people, but the likes of, first of all, the first one comes to mind would be Gerry Marshall. Phenomenal race car driver. Put him in any car and he basically would show you the road. He was very cool on the track. You watch his videos on YouTube from back in the 70s whenever he raced with DTV. He was very cool and very calm and collected, just drove the car and drove it exceptionally well. Engineering wise would be the likes of, well, our own John Crossley, if I can say our own John Crossley, and Bill Blydenstein would be another engineering genius that I would look up to and would be inspired by. Frank Costin, the aerodynamicist, Colin Chapman of Lotus, obviously, and people like that, people who sort of came from very, very little, not the big industries that they have nowadays, but people who came from very little and yet were able to make the very best of what they had at the time, and were beating opposition who had a lot more money and a lot more brains technical wise, but these people just seem to, no matter what they touch, they seem to turn up gold with it. Those are people who inspire me, and I keep going in the hope that someday maybe something like that will happen to me, but it's a long way off yet.
David, you mentioned a bit about Gerry Marshall, and he indeed would be one of my heroes. The man was simply a genius, and actually it's only lately that I became aware that I used to think he was a big culchie, for want of a better word, but in actual fact he was not. He was a very well-spoken guy. He just happened to be fond of the beer. I mean that in the nicest possible way. He carried a bit of weight, and he probably got that from drinking beer. I don't mean it any other way than that. And he was often seen with a pint celebrating after the event. But I know he's someone, well, you've already said he's someone that means a lot to you and you admire them. And I know that in your workshop you have certain things which, let's say, would, I don't want to say be a tribute to Gerry Marshall, but there would be a connection there, wouldn't there?
So as I said earlier, I've always been a DTV, Gerry Marshall, Bill Bleidenstein fan, and one of the cars that they campaigned way back in the early 70s, although I never saw any of these races other than on the YouTube videos that you can see, one of the cars that they campaigned was a Ventura, a Vauxhall Ventura. Now, it wasn't just a Ventura, it had a 5-litre V8 Formula 5000 Repco engine in it with about 500 horsepower. That car, sadly, met its demise at Brands Hatch when an incident fell out. I think the brake pads or something fell out, and he ran out of brakes at the end of Hanger Street, and the car was totaled. The mechanicals of that car went into then the Firenza that they built later. Now, Gerry Marshall being a sort of an English eccentric, would be he would have nicknamed all his cars, and the nickname that he had given the Ventura was Big Bertha, and hence whenever Big Bertha was destroyed and all the mechanicals were taken out of that, they put them into the Firenza and they called it Baby Bertha. As I said to you, Baby Bertha, or Big Bertha rather, doesn't exist anymore. Baby Bertha still exists, and Joe Ward owns that car, and it still would make appearances at race meetings and the Goodwood Hill Climb, for example. But I've always harboured an ambition to recreate Big Bertha, the Firenza, or the Ventura, and that's what this particular object is for. There's a lot of work has to be done to it. This is the best shell that I could come up with, and we have a lot of work to do to it, but maybe in a year or 18 months time I'll have something more to show you. This hopefully is going to end up looking like that. It might take a while, but we'll get there eventually.
Nice one. Look forward to seeing that machine. That would be something else. So tell us, or show us something about, show us some more of the MX5s. What about your own?
This is my own little car that I campaigned last year. As I say, we've been carrying out a few repairs. The very last meeting of last year, it ran a big end bearing, it spun a big end bearing on me, and as I say, I've no reason, I could still don't understand why it did it, but it did. So we have rebuilt the engine and done a few other things to take a bit more weight out of the car. I could probably do with taking a bit more weight out of myself as well. I also fitted flush fitting windows, which is something that I've always wanted to do to an MX5. So the racing was an excuse to do it, basically. So, yeah.
You mentioned the Kennedy family, father and son, and you prepare and look after their cars, isn't that right?
These are the two other cars that we built for last year as well. This is Rob Kennedy's car and Jim Kennedy's car. This is the lap record holder, and that one isn't because Jim drives it, and he won't mind me saying it like that either. So we built this and this one, and then Oran O'Neill's car, which hopefully Paul Sheridan will be driving this year. And he bought that car last year, and it's all been re-liveried. If you look on our page on Facebook, you'll see that it looks really, really tidy. So I'm looking forward to seeing that out.
Apart from massive big Vauxhalls and the myriad of MX5s, have you any other eclectic vehicles about you?
So as far as rare cars are concerned, or cars that we rarely work on. We have a couple here in the workshop at the minute. One of which is this little car here. I think this is about 1976 or 77. It's a Datsun 140J, and it's a 1.4 engine and gearbox. It's only 40,000 miles in this car now. You're saying, I can hear you saying, what are you going to do with that? Well, I don't really want to do anything with it, to be honest with you, because the car is so original. But the customer who owns the car is determined that he wants me to put an MX5 engine and gearbox into it. I have tried to dissuade him from this because the car is so original, but he is overriding that. So he wants an MX5 engine and gearbox in it. So that's why this little car is here at the minute. Apparently one of only 6 road-going cars of this mark left in the UK, which itself, the little car is immaculate practically everywhere. Underneath it's really tidy, and it's quite original. So we're going to try to do this as tastefully as we possibly can.
Now, I do know that you have a very special car, which most people will probably never have seen. So tell us a bit about it, please.
So this car is one of the other ones that are fairly rare and very unusual, and certainly very unusual for me to be working on. This particular model is a 1985 Wartburg. It's 1,000 cc's, 3-cylinder, 2-stroke. Had clutch issues, it had starter ring issues, it had various other things. Your head was cracked, the water bearing pumps were gone. So we pulled the engine out of it there last year and took it all apart and cleaned it all up, tidied it, fixed a cracked head. There was a cracked head on it, we fixed that. Several other little items, and put new bearings into the water pumps. Very unusual, but very simple little engine. We put it together there a couple of weeks ago. We put the engine into it there. We're waiting for a few more parts coming from Germany for it, but it's nearly there. The engine is running again. It's quite unusual in that it has 3 separate coil packs, just like a motorcycle would have, and a controller running off the front of the crankshaft here. But very, very basic. Obviously East Germany and the Iron Curtain and all that. So this is the Trabant's big brother. Slightly more robust, I think, than a Trabant. Very sturdy chassis, separate body chassis on this, and quite an unusual car to see. This particular one belongs to Alan Harriman, Terry's son, Terry Harriman's son. And this is the second unusual vehicle that that particular clan have foisted on me. The first one, they brought me an NSU 1200 Prince, which I believe Terry would have campaigned the like of that car way back in the late 60s, early 70s. And we did quite a lot of work to it too, and it's still being driven now, so and Terry's still enjoying it now, so which is great. So I look forward to having this driving away again in a cloud of 2-stroke smoke.
David, thank you very much for sharing your information about yourself and indeed about East Engineering. It has been very insightful, and I wish you all the best. So there you go, folks. That's our first interview over. Hopefully we'll have very many more. Keep an eye on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, and indeed our website for the Kirkistown.com. And don't forget that we have a newsletter which goes out free as well. And in fact, the people who receive the newsletter will be the first people to hear about this video. So thanks for bearing with me, and I'll see you all in the future.